All right, we are ready to rock. And yes, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, whatever time zone you happen to be in right now. I am delighted that you are all here. If you would, just drop into the chat where you are tuning in from. It's always good to see where in the world you are. Some of you I know, of course, some of you I do not know. So, welcome. Great to have you here. Let me know where you are. What's up, Athena? It's so good to see you. I mean, so good to have you in here. Hello from California. Awesome, awesome. Well, welcome everyone. This is going to be a lot of fun. I know, right? Um, this has been a long time coming. I first did this class, I think it was about 5 years ago. I want to say 2017 ish. I don't really know. It was a while back. And what that was from initially was I was on this program called the Prosperity Summit and got a lot of really great feedback from being on that and decided, hey, a lot of people still had a bunch of questions. So why not create yet another course and just make it for free, just make it whoever wanted to come and show up and talk a little bit about wealth. And so that's what happened. Now, that was, like I said, a long, long time ago. So my hope is that I've learned a thing or two in the last 5 or so years. And what was so, so interesting to me in this round of True Wealth is the way that people answered the questions. Now, the question was, what is your greatest obstacle to creating true wealth? So a lot of you sent in your answers. I have tons of them to respond to here. So we'll get to a lot of that. But what was very, very interesting was the first time around that I did this, a lot of the people were talking about manifestation and purpose and that sort of thing. And that's because of the audience that I had just spoken to with the Prosperity Summit. That was with a woman named Andy Anderson, and her crowd or her audience is very much into personal development, self growth, all of that type of stuff. I would say maybe slightly on the woo woo side, but not too far over. But that was the type of audience then that I had for this first True Wealth course. This time around, what was fascinating to me is a lot of people were answering that question is, what is your greatest challenge in terms of creating true wealth? They were answering it in terms of trading. Now, for those of you that don't know, I have a whole other program called the Daily Rage. Some of you are from that side of things. Some of you are from the Lucra historical side of things. So I've got everybody in the house tonight, which is a lot of fun. But it was so interesting to me that some of the people were, answering that question as if a trade or even just trading in and of itself could create true wealth, which it's so much bigger and broader than that. So we're going to talk about that tonight and just talk about how all of this is going to fit together. I wanted to share that with you though, because it was fascinating to me to see that that's like where people's focus is, where their mindset is determined that like, this is how I'm going to get money. And I want to broaden that perspective tonight because it's a whole lot more than that. And I want to prove it to you by telling you a story right out of the gate here. This was a number of years ago. My husband and I used to put on an event called 10K Speeches. My husband was a professional speaker, and we would teach people how to basically start a professional speaking business. So we had these events every single year. And one of our friends, Dean Graziosi, many of you may have heard of him because he's partnered recently with Tony Robbins and done a lot of different things that are very visible in the world of business, entrepreneurship, personal development, all of that stuff. So Dean is a buddy of ours here in Arizona, and he was on stage. And Sean, my husband, was like, hey, Mindy, why don't you come up here and let's do a little panel? So Sean was sitting in the middle. On this side was Dean, and on this side was me. And what was so funny about it is, for those of you that don't know who Dean Graziosi is, he's been responsible for like over $1 billion in sales. I'm talking big, big numbers. And so he's on one side, and then there's me on the other side, which I'm nowhere near that. So it was kind of this funny situation. And we were talking about money. We were going to do this money panel and talk about wealth. And Sean turns to Dean and he was like, Dean, let me ask you something. Do you feel wealthy? And without hesitation, Dean kind of looked at the floor, shook his head, and he was like, no. Well, I almost fell out of my chair because I'm like, what? How does this guy who has been responsible for billions of dollars worth of sales, like how is that even possible? How does he not feel wealthy? And so I'm like completely flabbergasted. Probably my mouth is hanging open. Like, how is this even possible? And then Sean turns to me and he was like, Mindy, do you feel wealthy? And I was like, yeah, I absolutely do. Now, I didn't have the money that Dean did. Sean and I never made that much money, but it was so extraordinary to me that I was like, wow, this has absolutely nothing to do with a dollar amount. This has absolutely nothing to do with what is in your bank account or your IRA or your savings or anything, how much your home is valued, anything with a number, it doesn't have anything to do with that. Now, that being said, I want to kind of future pace the story and like tell you what happened after that. So, like I said, this was a number of years ago that we had that money panel. And at that time, Dean was in a marriage that he wasn't happy with. They weren't happy together. And that marriage ended up ending. And now he is remarried, has a brand new kid, like all kinds of good things in his life. And I saw him years after that happened. And I said, Dean, let me ask you something. Do you remember that money panel that we did? You said that you didn't feel wealthy, which I thought was absolutely insane. Do you feel wealthy now? And this huge smile comes across his face. And he was like, absolutely. So you can see that it has nothing to do with the money. So let's talk about how I am defining this true wealth concept. First, true. It is authentic to you. It might look different to you than to somebody else, and that is okay. It is what is true for you is not necessarily going to be true for others. So I really want you to take ownership of this experience and determine for yourself, what is that for you? What is true for you? What is authentic to you? And then wealth as a concept, many of you, if you've heard my podcast, you might be familiar with this, but wealth, the word in and of itself, the etymology of that word comes from an old word from Middle English and Old English that is WEAL. So weal, not sure how they would have pronounced it back then, but something along those lines. That is where our term wealth comes from today. But what it meant originally was well-being. So if we look at this overall overarching concept of well-being, what all does that include? That includes all the different aspects of life. Yes, money is a part of that, but so is health, so is relationships, so is being on your purpose and living out what it is that you're here to do. So is your spiritual connection, whatever that might look like for you, whether it's a religion or not a religion, doesn't matter, but all of that comes into play in how you feel on a day-to-day basis. How well are you? All of those aspects are super important. So I wanted to go back and talk a bit about money, because like I said, so many people just contribute or attribute wealth to how much money do I have? Does that make me wealthy? Am I wealthy? Like who is out there that can tell you this? Yes, of course, there's, certain lists that people get on, in Forbes or Fortune or whatever. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like regular everyday people who are doing their thing and really want to be well. They want to be wealthy. And a lot of people think that money is going to solve the problem for them. They think that money is going to make them happy. Well, we all know that that's not necessarily true, because we've seen people who have tons of money who are not even happy, who are not content, who are, very scared. There's all kinds of different things. And again, the money doesn't have anything to do with it. But let's talk about what money does have to do with it, what it actually is. So back in the day, everything used to be bartered, right? We would trade. We might trade. If I had goats and you had chickens and I needed some chickens to lay some eggs, I might trade you, a goat for some chickens. Well, that's a lot of work to carry around these things or to meet together to trade those things. And it turned out that using some sort of a coin to determine the value of that thing was just a whole lot easier. We could carry them with us instead of having all these animals or whatever our wares were. So it just was a simplification of the bartering system, just easier to use coins. And these days, as we all know, I see you guys are all over the world in this thing, but it's easier nowadays to just use digital numbers. How often are we using a credit card or even typing in those numbers onto a website somewhere to buy something? It's just so much simpler to use digital currency. And I don't mean crypto, but like, online money. It's all electronic anyway. So it's just a simplification of the same bartering system. We don't have to any longer trade pigs or cows or whatever it is that we had back in the day, which is really very convenient. I appreciate that quite a bit. And in terms of the value of various things, always 100% of the time, it's going to be what we agree that value is. Here's something interesting. Back in the 1600s, tulips, tulips, like as in the bulb that creates the flower, were such a hot commodity. A single bulb was worth over $1,000. Now, that's crazy because it's a bulb that creates a flower. And it was so just everybody needed it at that time and everybody wanted it and everybody agreed at that time that the value was so high. So the people who had these bulbs, they would be able to charge just higher and higher and higher and higher prices. And as long as someone else was agreeing with them, and in other words, the agreement was the, hey, I'm going to buy this from you, here's the cash. As long as someone else is agreeing, then that is the value of that thing. But then in 1637, in February, that whole tulip market crashed down, the tulip bubble burst. Why? Because suddenly all these people who had the bulbs and had inflated the price of them, because I mean, most people would say a tulip bulb is not worth over $1,000. They couldn't find buyers then for their wares. They couldn't find a buyer for that thing. They couldn't find somebody to agree on the value that they were claiming that thing held. Now, I want to be very, very clear because I know a lot of you in here are entrepreneurs, and sometimes it can be challenging to figure out, what is it worth or what is the value of this thing? How do I put a price on this thing? And here's the good news is that, like I said, it only takes two people to agree. There is a buyer and there is a seller. I want to give you another example of this. A number of years ago, I was putting together a trip to Kenya. I was going to bring a small group of people over there to do some humanitarian work. I spoke with one lady who was like really jazzed to go, and I told her the price of the trip, and she was like, "Ooh, that's really expensive." I was like, "Okay, that is your opinion. It's all good. It's really, really expensive." She didn't end up going on the trip. In the same exact day, I spoke with another woman who also was really jazzed to go on the trip. And I told her the price, same thing that I said to the other lady previously. And she was like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe you're charging like that little amount. Like, let's go." So she paid right away. She went on the trip. We had a great time. But it was the exact same thing, the exact same price, two very, very different perspectives in terms of like what is the value of this thing that I am offering. And again, I only need one other person to agree with me to be my client. Now, if you only have one client, that may not work out well for you, depending on what you're charging. But you get my point. It's like you only need one person to agree with you to recognize, yes, this is this amount of value. I am willing to open my wallet to you. I'm willing to pay that amount. Let's go. So it doesn't necessarily matter about what is the right price. There is no right price. There is no right or wrong in any of this. It's simply about deciding what is the value that you want to put out there, and then being able to say, okay, who out there agrees that this is of that same value and is willing to then pay for it. That's how we make money as an entrepreneur. So I wanted to get into some of the concerns and questions and frustrations and statements that you all had. And then there's a whole bunch of other stuff that I want to share with you as well. So I have, like I said, I have tons of them here. So I'm going to go through these relatively quickly. And if you have other questions, concerns, whatever you need, drop them into the chat. I'd be happy to go over them all at the end. So Philip wrote in and he said, time to learn. So I'm going to give Philip, you, and all the rest of any of you that think, oh, I just don't have time to learn about wealth and finance and money and all these different things, or entrepreneurship or trading or whatever route you want to take. Who's in charge of your schedule, right? I mean, some of you may have a regular job that you need to go to at a certain time and then work a certain number of hours. But apart from that, you probably have some time that is under your control. So if you can carve out even small increments of that, it's going to be more effective to you to have the consistency of even a little bit of time over time, as opposed to trying to like do all of this in one day or 1 week or 1 month. Because I promise you that whether you're on the entrepreneurial path, whether you're on the path as a trader, I'm assuming most of you probably fall into one of those two categories since that's generally my audience. It's likely going to take longer than you assume that it will take. Like everything takes longer. You know, I started my business and I was like, oh, I'm going to be a millionaire by like, next year. This was back in 2007. It took 7 years to even hit six figures. So I was definitely not a millionaire in 1 year. I thought the same thing in trading. I mean, I'm overly optimistic anyway, just kind of goes with the territory. But I was like, "Ooh, I'm gonna learn how to trade. I'm gonna be a millionaire by like next month." Well, that didn't happen either. It always takes longer than you think. But that is why if we can carve out these small bits of time, that's going to be more impactful to you. Anybody that, comes to me, if whether it's a client or whomever, and they're talking about time, I'm like, do you realize that J.K. Rowling, who is the author of the Harry Potter series, she was a single mother and she wrote those things like in her little teensy bits of time that she could find when she wasn't working to put food on the table for her children or taking care of the kids, specifically. And she has created a whole empire. Well, now I don't imagine that any one of us is like a J.K. Rowling, but we could be. Who knows? But it's just carving out these little pieces of time and making it a priority. So a bunch of people listed psychology, mindset, all of these types of things. Jonna said, naming my value. And I want to be very, very, very crystal clear about this is your value or your worth is ineffable. It's infinite. There is no way that you could quantify that. What you can do is you can decide on a specific price point for your services and put that out there. But I want you to disconnect that from like your own personal worth or your own value, because your worth is not negotiable. A price may be negotiable. Your worth is not. Dennis says, my own fears, rationalizations, and distractions that go on in my mind. Now, unfortunately, this is all of us. We as humans, we tend to be very distractible. And there are tips, tools, tricks, all kinds of good things that we can do to assist us in getting past that. But again, you need to make the commitment and you need to take the consistency of practicing getting over that stuff. Malcolm said mindset, confidence, and self-esteem. And I'm going to go into, for all of those kind of psychology related things, I'm going to tell you a little bit more in just a few minutes. So I want to go through some more of these. Ignacio said, not knowing what I would like to start and the cost of an investment, whatever that might be. I am 64 years of age, living paycheck to paycheck as a school bus driver. And here's the thing, with anyone that is in the position of like, well, I don't know what I want to do, and my clients who are in here will recognize this. I say this all the time. I'm like, just pick something, pick anything, because here's why. If you don't, ooh, and Athena, I'm going to tell a story about you. This is awesome that you're here. So, back in the day, I don't know how long ago this was, a long time ago, my friend and client Athena, who's here tonight, she was a few of us friends were here in Sedona, Arizona, and we were hiking. And at one point in time, Athena was leading the way. And Athena, I hope it's okay that I'm telling this. I tell this story all the time because it's such a good story. Athena was leading the way on this trail, and I was right behind her. And we're, cruising along through the beautiful Sedona Red Rock wilderness and all having a good time, and everything is lovely. And eventually she just stops. She was like, well, I don't know where to go. Like, I don't see where the trail is headed. And so, because she's also my client, I'm always one for a little tough love. I was like, okay, well, what are we gonna do? I'm not gonna like show you where it is or take the lead. Like that's your role right now. So what are we gonna do? And eventually she was like, well, I guess we'll just kind of keep going in this direction and we'll see what we see. As it turned out, we did keep going in that direction. We walked a little bit further on, and then from that perspective, we could see the next cairn. Cairns are the rock formations that tell you basically you're on the right path. They have them as trail markers all around Sedona. So we couldn't see it from our initial perspective where we were. So we had to take a couple steps forward to then get a fresh perspective, a different perspective, and then be able to see, oh, that's the path. Cool. Now we know where we're going. And life is sometimes very, very similar. A lot of people are like, well, I don't know what I want to do, or I don't know where to start. I'm like, just pick something. The pick something metaphorically would be taking a few steps forward toward something that you're interested in or something that you could help somebody else with. Both of those are great starting points. And then from that metaphorical couple steps that you have taken forward, you may be able to have a different perspective that then the path becomes clear or the path becomes illuminated. And it's like, okay, now I know exactly what I want to do. I wouldn't have known it had I never picked anything. So just pick something. And like I said, whether it's doing something that could help somebody else, that's a great one, or something that you are interested in, and just get into it, do something, go to a meetup, go research it online, whatever that first step is for you, just start. Michael says, belief that it is possible in the time frame I have. Also choosing the best path for those results. So kind of spoke to that path part already. And let's talk about time. Now, this is a perspective that I have today that I did not have 5 years ago. I have very, very, very little patience with people talking about time. None of us know how much time we have left on this planet. Any one of us could get hit by a bus tomorrow or next week or next month or next year. Me, you, whomever, we don't know. I know that all too well because in August 2019, what happened on a very, very, very normal Wednesday, my husband and I were going to go to the gym. That day ended with him passing away in emergency surgery and it all being over within 4 hours. So you do not know. And my thing is like, don't waste your time here because you don't know. You may only have a short amount of time left. And the like one of the billion things that I am so grateful for with my husband Sean is that he lived it up. Like he really, really lived in his 40 years. He did it. And then he was like, peace out, I'm done. And like that is so awesome. But I don't have a ton of patience, I guess, is the best way to say it with people that are like, oh, like the time. You're right. You don't know how much time you have, but you know what you do have? You have right now. So you can figure out something to do that might be a benefit to society at large, or even just one other person, or even yourself. So that's I'll get off my time soapbox now. Claire says, mindset to follow the trading rules and get out when the market goes against you. Okay, so this is what I was talking about, where people now, because I have a different audience with the Daily Rage folks, they're talking specifically about trading. So we're not going to get into that much here because this is a much, much broader conversation around wealth. Shiv says, fear of failure. And what's so fascinating about the fear of failure is that its opposite is also often true, and that is the fear of success. So, for any of you that are, whatever your goal or your dream is, which one feels scarier to you? Fear, or the fear of failure, or the fear of success? And I used to always think, oh, like it would be the worst thing to fail. But let me tell you, you will. Like there is no way to get to success without failure. So failure, that part actually becomes a little bit easier, I dare say. You just have to get through it. You just have to accept that you will fail, no matter how good you are, no matter how perfect all your stuff is. You will fail in some way, shape, or form because failure is on the path toward success. But then what happens when you get to success? Might that be even scarier? Because then what does that mean? Does that mean that you have to be much more visible online? Does that mean that people will look at you differently if you have a certain amount of money or a certain amount of things or just a certain amount of success? Will people make assumptions about your success? Sean and I used to crack up all the time because we would do Google searches and we would say like Sean Stevenson net worth or Mindy Kinnis net worth. And we would find the craziest stuff online. I think the biggest one we found for Sean was like $33 million or something. And I was like, babe, do you want to let me in on this? Like, where is all this money? We didn't have that much money, but like people have these assumptions online and who knows where they make up these numbers from. But like people assume things and then maybe people want something from you or you're the one in the family that everybody comes to for a loan and that might be very uncomfortable. Lots of different things. So I want you to consider, fear of failure, fear of success, which one is actually the bigger issue. Ricardo, hey, Ricardo, see you in here, says not being able to find a focused direction, if that makes sense. So again, I would think back to like just taking steps forward. And I know, Ricardo, for you specifically, you are with trading and all of that stuff, but maybe, and this is true for anybody, maybe it's not that. We oftentimes will go toward something and think like, oh, this is going to be amazing. This is going to be it. Like, this is going to be how I'm going to make my money. And then as we get more and more into it, we're like, yeah, actually, I don't even like that. So you always want to be, again, this true wealth, authentic to you. It should feel good. It is a portion of your well being. So if, whether it's starting a certain business or venturing into some kind of investment, whatever it might be, or real estate, whatever, you do want it to, granted, now let me parse this out. It will be hard work, yes, and that doesn't always feel like roses and play. It will be hard work, but in the inner sanctum of yourself, it should also feel good. Like it should feel like you're on the right path. Sometimes people get into something and they're like, this is not it. I don't even like this. And that's okay. I would way rather you all be honest with yourselves. And sometimes that's hard if family has expectations, or maybe you went to school for like 25 years to learn to do a certain thing. And then you don't want to do that certain thing. And like, then what? What do you do? But it is so, so, so important for you to be like on the right path. Okay. Zana says, I have been running a 6-figure music and movement business for 30 plus years. Congratulations, Zana. And all of a sudden, I lost the passion for it. What I truly want is to heal people through sound healing and my songs in a massive way while creating true wealth for myself. What stops me is my resentment to marketing and all the business side of doing it and starting pretty much from scratch. Any suggestions would be highly appreciated. Okay, a couple thoughts on the various things that you said. One is you wouldn't totally be starting from scratch. You already, must have a following or must have some sort of client base or audience or something if you've been doing that for 30 years. What I did was I'm like, hey, initially I was a life coach. Well, I mean, initially I was in corporate America, but then I was a life coach. And then life coaching kind of transitioned into more business coaching because what I found is that a lot of the people were like, Mindy, I think I'd like to do what you do. How did you do what you did? So then I started talking about that. So then that transitioned into that. So I didn't have to necessarily start a new audience. Now that seems like a pretty easy, stretch from life coaching to business coaching. Yes, it was. But then more recently, last year, I was like, I'm going to start this trading thing. Well, I kind of had to start from scratch, but not really because I already had that other group of people. So I just reached out to all of those people and I was like, hey, I'm on this new adventure. Does anyone want to come hang out with me over here at the Daily Rage and see what happens? And some people did. Now, of course, not all of them, most of them did not, but that's okay because then I was able to build from that small group of people into adding new fun people, which many of you are in here tonight. So I don't want you to think about like totally starting from scratch. That's not necessarily the case. And I also 100% get it about the resentment to marketing and the business side, as you said. My thing was, I resented it so much. Marketing, sales, I hated everything to do with it. I did not want to be that smarmy, sleazy salesperson that was like trying to convince people to buy my stuff. I'm like, I just want people to buy my stuff if they want to buy my stuff. That's, kind of the baseline. But I hated it so much and refused it so much. That was how I ended up being evicted from my apartment, having a house foreclosed, filing for bankruptcy, and living out of my office back about 12, 13 years ago. So I want to put some caution out there that it can get pretty bad because you do have to do that stuff. Now, granted, if you've been in the business for 30 some years, you may have a budget. Then that's really, really great because you can hire people to do the stuff that you don't want to do. If there's marketing stuff that you're just like take that, maybe hire someone to do sales for you, hire a marketing person, even start with a VA or virtual assistant that can maybe do some of that for you, just to take some of it off of your plate. That can be very, very helpful. The thing is, for those of you, and I totally was this back in the day, I didn't have a budget. I was like, it's me. That's it. That's all I have. So I had to do those things. And how did I turn around that complete disaster of a beginning into entrepreneurship of like bankruptcy and all of that stuff? I learned everything I could about marketing and sales. And here's the crazy part. Here's like kind of the secret is it's actually not that bad. I actually found that I loved it because really what marketing is psychology. And I love the workings of the human mind. I love the interactions between people. I love the connection points that we have and the relationships that we can build. That's what true marketing is. So I just had a crappy perspective of what is marketing, and I was like, oh, it's so sleazy and I don't want to do that. I don't want to be that, all of that stuff. So it's not that at all. Well, I should say it doesn't have to be that at all. There certainly are people who still approach it in that way. That doesn't have to be you. You can do it however you want. So what's funny is these days I am much more so in the perspective of like, hey, I'd love it if you want to come and hang out and talk about whatever we're going to talk about in this course or class or retreat or whatever it is that I'm selling. And if not, that's cool too. Like it's all good either way. So you don't have to, that's definitely like a judgment that we are placing on it. And I get it because I did as well. Jan says, ambivalence. I know the true wealth is spiritual, so material feels like a shameful side issue somehow. However, I also know that's a downright ridiculous attitude. So Jan, first of all, I appreciate the honesty in that. That's awesome. And I get that too, because I grew up in the North Shore of Chicago area. There's a lot of money there, a lot of wealthy people in that area. And not just wealthy people, but like, let's say overtly wealthy people. I mean, big, big, big houses and like really fancy cars. In my high school, I mean, granted, we're like, 16, 17, 18 years old. In my high school, the whole parking lot is like really fancy, really expensive cars. Now, I did not have one of those, but that was the area that I was born and raised in. And I came from that. And Jen felt very much like you do. Like I didn't want that because I looked at it as like what is all this materialism? What is all this? Like who cares about all of this stuff? I I am gonna be like the good girl. I'm gonna go feed starving children in Africa. I'm gonna go do all this other stuff, humanitarian stuff. And yeah, I like all that stuff, but I also was like pushing materialism away. Now, again, going back into the psychology, this is like open the door to my own personal psychology. Why might I have done that? Because really, secretly, like deep down, I wanted it. Like I wanted my parents to get me a fancy car on my 16th birthday. They didn't. I wanted to be able to wear the clothes that a lot of those people did. I couldn't. I wanted that, but like because I wasn't able to have it or didn't have it, I was like, screw that. I mean, this is such a teenager mentality, right? Screw that. I don't want it anyway. I'm going to go be the opposite. I'm going to do the other thing. So screw that. It's not about the money. I don't care about the money. Money doesn't matter anyway. Well, really? Really? Tell that to my future self, who's then sitting, living out of her office. Tell her that money doesn't matter. Yeah, money matters because I couldn't pay my rent. I couldn't pay the mortgage. I could hardly eat. I was literally surviving on the Jack in the Box dollar menu in Portland, Oregon. Money does matter and it's a big thing. So Jan, I love just the awareness of like that contradiction in ourselves. And I'm right there, I've been there with you. So consider that. Jessica, hey Jessica, what's up? Jessica said mindset. And Rob, I know you're in here. Rob, you had like the longest answer. I think you answered this twice. Clearly, obviously, the challenge is within me and myself. So, yes, I think all can agree on that. It is that my life purpose, passion is or was destroyed, failed, or abandoned. I would be very curious to explore that. I now assume I need money to survive, so I trade. I don't have to sell anything or sell myself, and people interactions are minimal. True wealth almost sounds like a trick question. What is true wealth, and does it have to be measured in dollars? So I think we've answered that question, is that it's not. I'm still searching for my answer beyond that. I seem to lack the passion or belief that I could even get there. And I want to talk about that last sentence because I think a lot of people, I know a lot of people had similar responses of like, the belief, is this even possible for me? Because yeah, sure, it's possible for so and so out there and they're doing it, but for me, I don't know. And the problem with that is that not is that like I can't or nor can anyone else out there other than you, other than we ourselves, choose to begin to have that belief. The problem is if you believe that it is not possible, then it's not. I think Henry Ford or somebody like that said, whether you believe you can or you can't, you're right. Reason being is our beliefs, which come from our unconscious mind. So it's not like we are thinking logically and rationally about these things all the time. Most of them are from way back when. Our unconscious mind has these beliefs, and those beliefs really, really create our reality. And they're now what I love so much about modern day science and studies and research and data is that it can prove a lot of the stuff that we kind of knew intuitively, or the spiritual or shamanic people or the saints and the sages, they've always been talking about this stuff. But now we have data to back it up, or research to prove it, or studies that, can show different results, which is awesome. And they have found that the success tends to be more prominent among optimistic people, those that actually believe it's possible or can see the vision of their future, of a future that they might like to step into. And that's really what it comes down to. That's really where it starts, is like, what do you want? This is such a difficult question. And I have asked hundreds of people. Clients used to come into my office, and one of the first things that we would talk about, I would be like, okay, what specifically do you want? And many times the first thing that would come out of their mouth would be, well, I don't want, and I'm like, "Da, da, da, da." I didn't ask you what you don't want. I asked you what you want. Like, what do you want? If any of you in this room virtually don't know the answer to that question, it might be worth sitting down with a pen and some paper, maybe a journal, and writing out, what do I want? And then letting yourself just see what happens, see what comes out. Even if it's like, I don't know what I want. Okay. But if I did know what I want, or now that I do know what I want, it is fill in the blank, whatever that might be. Now, some things that you might write down are going to have nothing to do with money or any of this stuff, but it might, again, be a step forward to give you a different perspective so that you can see that, oh, that's the next thing. Ooh, and then if that's what I want, okay, well, how am I going to get this? And it's really, really, really helpful to have the clarity on this. I had a client named Guy a number of years ago. She came through my coach training program, and she had just all of these like awesome, awesome visions for her life about owning different homes, different places, and like traveling part of the year and like doing all this cool stuff, she and her husband. And I was like, awesome, that sounds fantastic. And then what was so interesting, and she was the one who realized this, which I was delighted with, her coaching services that she was working on creating. She was working on building this business and really starting this coaching business. She wasn't really charging that much, and she really like didn't want to take on, a million clients either. She like wanted her time and her space to herself, to have some freedom. And I was like, okay, well, I'm thinking about the numbers. I'm like, how is this number over here, what you're charging these people, going to add up to give you that lifestyle? And she realized that. And I still remember because it was at a live event here in Sedona. And she's like looking at the paper, looking at, these are the services, these are the prices I'm going to charge. This is what I want to create in my life. And she's like, well, this doesn't work. Like, you're right. So maybe, we need to switch some things out and maybe just raise up that price a little bit, create more of a premium package, or like a really boutique style service so that you can charge more. And then that can lead into this lifestyle that you are wanting to create. So the clarity is very, 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 very helpful. Okay. Tom says, even when I was saving 6 figures per year, it never seemed like enough. And that too, that is not a number issue. That is a fear issue. Sean and I have a very, very dear friend named Tiamo. Some of you know him. And we had this conversation a long time ago. And Tiamo was saying to us, he was like, man, I'm not going to tell you what the number was because it doesn't matter about the number, but he was like, man, if I don't have this number saved in the bank, he's like, I can't sleep. I'm totally anxious. I just feel terrible. Like, it freaks me out if it drops below that number. And Sean and I looked at each other because to us, that number was like so much more than we had in our bank. We just look at each other and we start laughing and we're like, what? Like, how is that possible? We would think we were the richest people in the world if we had that amount in our bank account. Like, what? So it's not about the number. And it never is, because if it is about the number, then you're right. Who said this? Tom. It's like, it's never enough because it's just the number. That is a fear issue, not a number issue. Stephen says, me, I think I am my biggest obstacle. 100% yes, you are, as I am to me, and all of you are to each of you. Hey, Bettina, I just saw you in here. Kath says, believing in myself. Okay, so let's talk about beliefs. And here's where I want to Whew, and this time is going fast. Okay, so let's talk briefly. Some of you, probably all of you have heard this, but self-image. Our self-image is how everything happens, and it's who we are and the way that we project ourselves in the world. For all of us, we have ways of thinking about ourselves, like I am this type of person or I am that type of person. The example that I always use is the fat guy. If there was somebody, whomever, I mean, it doesn't even have to be a guy, whoever, if there is a person who is, let's say, overweight, and they just always think of themselves as an overweight person, what happens when that person goes on a diet? They decide, hey, I want to get healthy, I want to lose some weight, I'm going to, work out, I'm going to eat right. And what happens then? They very well may lose some weight. They very well may get back into shape. But if they don't shift the internal version of themselves or the self image that they hold, in other words, for this person, it's I'm the fat guy. If they don't do that internal work and change that, then externally they may, like I said, lose the weight, they may get in shape. But then what happens? Then they end up gaining it right back, and maybe even a little extra, maybe even a little more just for security. So the belief is so, so, so important. And that belief, like that idea of who we are, how we are, how the world works, what is our worldview, all of that stuff goes into play into that self image. And the cool thing is that it's very, very similar to a thermostat. So with a thermostat, you can just change the temperature very simply. If it gets too hot, you can be like, oh, cool, I'm going to put the AC on. Awesome. I'm going to bring it down to 70 degrees. Or if it gets too cold, you can turn the heat on. It's great. And what a thermostat is meant to do is to maintain a set point. So the thermostat does not think, oh, like this is really good or this is really bad. There is no judgment around whatever degree you have set the temperature to. Its whole job is just to maintain that set point. So it's going to act accordingly, kicking on the air conditioning or whatever it needs to do to bring it back to that set point. Well, internally, our self image has that same type of set point. So if we are always struggling for money, if we're always out of shape, if we always have relationships that suck, that's a very clear indication of that is what your set point is. Now, the good news is that we can change that set point. We can change it. There's 3 different ways to imprint a change in that set point. The first way is by authority. And I'm assuming that most of us in this room are adults, so that one doesn't really work out that well because we often don't have that level of authority in our lives. Most of our like early conditioning, whether we grew up with our parents or our grandparents or somebody who was taking care of us, those people were the authority in our lives. And a lot of their stuff just gets unconsciously transferred to us through things that they say, through things that they do, through just the energy that they put out into the world that often gets like implanted in us. So sometimes when we are adults and we realize that, we're like, oh, hold on, like that's not even my stuff. Like, let me get rid of that, because that just kind of, as a kid, you're just a sponge. So you don't have a conscious say in that. So that would be authority. That doesn't really help us right now because we're adults. Second, intensity. A lot of people that do personal growth type events and things, they do things like fire walks. The reason being is they're trying to raise up the intensity of that situation or of that circumstance so that it can imprint something new in the mind. Now, unless you are going to something like that, you may not have that opportunity. The other form of intensity I obviously don't recommend, that would be some sort of traumatic experience that can imprint stuff really, really fast into our unconscious mind. One, mostly that's out of our control, and 2, we wouldn't want that anyway. We don't want some traumatic experience just to have a new imprint. So what can we do? We can use repetition. And it's funny, in trading now, we're always talking about getting your reps in, getting your reps in. It's the same thing. It's whether we're talking about like internal mindset stuff or actual trading or doing business or whatever it might be, it's all about the repetition. So being able to change your story from I am the fat guy to whatever you want it to be. What type of future would you like to step into? Who would you like to be? And how can you put that into play, at least mentally, now? I'm sure many of you have heard the studies that they have done, and there's just research after research after research on this, is that athletes, if they are practicing something in their mind, it's as if their brain and their body like doesn't know that they're not actually doing it. So if they're using mental rehearsal, there have been studies shooting free throws with basketballs, and they did a study where one group of those people didn't actually shoot the basketball at all physically. They just envisioned it. They just did it in mental rehearsal. Well, their scores went up anyway. And Olympic athletes use this all the time. They will visualize their race, from like the starting block to the initial like shot that, they have to just sprint out. And their brain, if they hook them up to all the electrodes to see what's going on, the brain thinks they're actually doing it, even if they're sitting in a chair. So this is how all of this starts. We need to visualize, well, first, clarify what it is that we want, and then use repetition to visualize it and visualize it and visualize it so much that then the neurons in our brain begin to fire in a different way, so much that then they become wired together in a different way. That then is what changes everything externally. It always starts internally first. Okay, let me get, we have just a few minutes. Let's finish these. Consistency, we talked a little bit about that. Malcolm says, not being focused enough, the everyday things of life seem to hold me back. And that, again, I talked a little bit earlier about distraction. That is true for all of us. So your job, all of our jobs, is to do whatever we can do to limit distraction. When I am working on something, I put my phone in airplane mode. I call it radio silence. Like, I cannot have people texting me or whatever, because then I'll just be like, oh, it's like, what's happening over here? What's happening over there? What's going on? I don't own a television, so I don't have that as a distraction. Like, I am very, very, very conscious about eliminating as much as I can. Now, there's still going to be tons and tons of stuff, like daily life stuff, like Malcolm said, but the work that we need to do, and this is not always easy, but the work we need to do is to attempt at least a little bit to get some of those things, like just push them aside, at least for a duration. At least give yourself an hour a day, half an hour a day, 15 minutes a day. Maybe start with 5 if you only have 5 minutes. It doesn't even matter. Like, take 5 minutes and just shut out all distractions. I think anybody can take at least 5 minutes. This person said mindset. Seamus said knowing exactly what true wealth is. What am I on this earth for? Bringing it all together as simply as possible for the correct audience in the right way. Seamus, unfortunately, it may not be that simple because, like I said, it is very hard work, but it is worth the work and worth the effort. Natalie says, I've been on this insane roller coaster with money. I'd say true wealth extends beyond that, but when the bank accounts hit 0, money feels like the most important and urgent thing. Ain't that the truth? I'll make money, have money saved, and things will be on this wonderful upward spiral. And then, seemingly out of the blue, I'll get hit with a bunch of huge expenses and/or lose contracts, have income streams disappear, accounts hacked, etc. Then it's a struggle for a while until I can shift things back the other way. But this is years of this same pattern, and quite frankly, I'm exhausted by it. So this is the perfect one to wrap up with, because we all, within our self-image, within our set point, we all have what's called an upper limit. And that limit is what we think is like good and appropriate for us. Now, our ego might fight what I'm saying right now and be like, I don't have that. I want to make as much money as I possibly can. Oh, really? Then why does that same set point keep showing up and showing up, that upper limit that you just can't seem to get past? Some of you in here are in Lucrative Trader. That's my mindset trading program. And I was telling you guys a story not that long ago about a salesman who, and this was way back in the day, so just these numbers are really small, but from many, many years ago, he was making like $5,000 a year. Let's say it's 50, just make it a little more sense today's standards. He was making $50,000 a year. And his company was like, oh my gosh, this guy's rocking it. Like, it's so great. Let's send him out to an even better community of people and bigger, like more people. So likely he'll make more money than that. Guess how much he made? $50,000. And then they're like, okay, well, that didn't work. Let's send him to a smaller, like really crappy community and see what happens there. Guess how much he made? $50,000. He then became sick at one point. Like, he had made the $50,000 earlier in the year. He became sick and miraculously, like at the end of the year, was well enough to then start fresh again to work toward his $50,000 the following year. Now, just to be clear, none of us do this consciously. And it takes a lot of dissection of like, okay, if this is a pattern, and I want all of you to, see this in yourselves potentially, if this is the pattern that I am continuing, what do I need to do to change it? How do I need to shift that set point? I'll give you an example from my own experience. My story, my money story, for a long, long, long time, and I had to do a ton of work, still do a ton of work on this, is that money only comes from working really, really hard. Both of my parents had more than one job, so they were working a lot. Now, we didn't lack for anything, but like I saw that, like, if they wanted more money, like they had to just work harder and longer and more time. So that was my story. So then as an entrepreneur, what did I do? I put that into play. Like, I had to work really, 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 really hard, and wasn't that profitable at first until I realized, wait, this is just the story that I'm telling myself. And then when I got into trading, it got even blown out of the water, even more extreme, because trading is even less work for more potential money. And I was like, wait, I'm literally sitting here in my pajamas, clicking a button on my computer to place a trade or exit a trade. I'm making what could be hundreds or thousands of dollars in potentially a matter of minutes. And that just like blew my brain up because it didn't associate more money to hard work. It wasn't hard. So then what did I do? I lost a lot of that money. Like, I had a set point, an upper limit, and I like wasn't allowing myself to get past that. Well, then the beautiful thing for all of you here is that you're here. You're aware enough to have the consciousness to like find these things in your life, to seek them out and be like, okay, what am I doing that is causing this or that continues to cause this? So I'm looking at the time. We have 1 minute left. I'm going to stop there. I want to thank you for attending tonight. It means the world to me that you would take time out of your Monday evening, afternoon, whatever time zone. I know some of you, Ricardo, it's like the middle of the night for you in London. So I do appreciate all of you being here. Have a great night. I'll talk to you guys soon. Take care.